澳大利亚北领地财政局长突然鼓吹，是时候掏钱将达尔文港买回来了。难道澳大利亚想变卦，准备将租给中国99年的达尔文港强行收回？对此，我国又该如何应对？租给中国99年的达尔文港，澳大利亚是世界上唯一一个独占一个大陆的国家。
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit I got no love for the fakeness If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this I'll always show up and make a statement I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit I got no love for the fakeness If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this I'll always show up and make a statement
Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit I got no love for the fakeness If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this I'll always show up and make a statement I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit I got no love
think
for
I'm
the
all paying back
fakeness If
But
you
I
wanna
don't know
play
what that
tough
can
and wanna
erase all
hate
the
this
past
I'll
and the
always show
pettiness
up and make a statement
It's hilarious, you don't you're with my time You're delirious, mysterious Because you are behind the fake exterior Inferior, you know I'll always be that superior Get off of me, this ain't no humble brag I want you to hear words, you can say them back I want you to feel free from the chains that last And to believe in what you got, it was built to last But I don't know if that can erase all the past and the
pettiness, a reflection of the emptiness Hilarious, you think you're with my time, you're delirious Mysterious, because you are behind the fake exterior Inferior, you know I'll always be a bit superior Get off of me, this ain't no humble brag I want you to hear words, you can say them back I want you to feel free from the chains that last And to believe in what you got, it was built to last No, I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this I'll always show up and make a statement
Gonna learn the consequence of being incompetent
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit I got no love for the fakeness If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this I'll always show up and make a statement I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit I got no love for the fakeness If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this I'll always show in my head and make a statement I'll be great one day, going off of my meds No I'm not giving up, no I'm not giving in I will make it to the top, taking off in the wind I gotta make it, I'm saving every day to taste it I'm patient, but my mind, it can hardly take it I'm chasing a dream that I've had for several ages A vacant, modern kingdom for the taking
Believe you could be so remarkable
Thoughts in my head, a collage and they spread I'll be great one day, going off of my meds No I'm not giving up, no I'm not giving in I will make it to the top, taking off in the wind I gotta make it, I'm saving every day to taste it I'm patient, but my mind, it can hardly take it I'm chasing a dream that I've had for several ages A vacant, modern kingdom for the taking I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this I'll always show up and make a statement I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit I got no love for the fakeness If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this I'll always show up and make a statement I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit I got no love for the fakeness If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this I'll always show up and make a statement
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit I got no love for the fakeness If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this I'll always show up
寻求双方都能接受的处理方案。总之，澳大利亚需要清楚的是，强行收回达尔文港，付出代价最大的只会是他们自己，一意孤行是不会有好结果的。